Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Monday ruled are conceding territories during possible talks on a peace settlement to end the fighting in Ukraine. According to Associated Press, the Russian top diplomat mocked a question about possible territorial concessions his country would be ready to make during peace talks, claiming any turnover of territories would endanger Russians living there. Lavrov also denied Europeans a seat at the negotiating table, accusing them of intending to use a possible ceasefire to enable Ukraine to pursue fighting. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Lavrov and Putin's foreign affairs advisor Yuri Ushakov will fly to the Saudi capital later in the day to take part in talks set for Tuesday. Peskov said the talks will be primarily focused on restoring the entire complex of US-Russian relations, as well as organizing possible talks on the Ukrainian settlement and the meeting of the two presidents. Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff told Fox News Sunday that he and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will travel to Saudi Arabia for talks on Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is leading a delegation to Saudi Arabia for direct talks with Russian officials in the coming days to seek an end to the fighting in Ukraine.
И вы хотите, чтобы даже мысль какая-то присутствовала на переговорах об урегулировании относительно того, что какие-то территории нужно еще уступить. Уступить-то как? С людьми, с русскими? Или без людей? С одними редкоземельными металлами? А только говорят, вот надо территориальные уступки, наверное. Для чего? Для того, чтобы там вот так же русских уничтожали, как сейчас их уничтожают в Курской области и в других областях Российской Федерации.
Это говорить вам об отношении Европейского парламента к Сербии и более широком смысле о Европе.
То есть философия-то у европейцев никуда не делась, поэтому я не знаю, что им делать за переговорным столом. Если они будут вот так выцыганивать какие-то лукавые идеи про заморозку конфликта, а сами по обычаю, по своему и по своему нраву и привычкам будут иметь в виду продолжение войны, то зачем их туда приглашать?
In recent weeks, a series of provocations by the aggressor country, Russia, have taken place in the Baltic Sea. However, the Kremlin decided not to stop there and, in its own style, announced the blowing up of a foreign ship, cynically lying that Ukraine was planning to do so. The lie that Ukraine is planning sabotage in the Baltic Sea has begun to be spread by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. These fakes were immediately picked up by Kremlin propagandists as well as Russian media outlets that call themselves opposition. Russian intelligence officers invented that Ukrainian special services were going to carry out a provocation with the assistance of their Western curators. Moscow is lying that Ukraine is trying to draw the alliance into a direct armed conflict with the Russian Federation. Russian intelligence officers did not stop there and invented that the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, together with the special services of European countries, is preparing attacks on representatives of the Russian non-systemic opposition and businessmen fleeing the law who live abroad. Now European countries are holding behind-the-scenes talks on large-scale seizures of Moscow's oil-exporting tankers in the Baltic Sea, according to 2 European Union diplomats and 2 government officials. They are also currently drafting new legislation to add legal heft to those efforts. The proposals being considered include using international law to grab vessels on environmental or piracy grounds, said the officials who were granted anonymity to discuss the private talks. Failing that, the country could go it on their own, jointly imposing fresh national laws to seize more ships further out at sea. Close to 50% of sanctioned trade in Russian seaborne oil is going through the Gulf of Finland, said Estonia's Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna. There are the environmental threats. There are the attacks we've had against our undersea infrastructure. Now the question is, what can we do with these ships? He told Politico, "We cannot block all the sea, but we can control more. there are lots of opportunities. The talks illustrate Europe's growing frustration that Russia continues to transport its oil and dodge Western sanctions by relying on an ever-growing shadow fleet, aging vessels with obscure ownership and unknown insurance. By doing so, Moscow has been able to preserve a key lifeline for its war effort in Ukraine, given that oil and gas generate around half of the Kremlin's revenues. Three years of war later, Russian ultra-patriots have become completely disillusioned with the Russian army, which was unable to win the war against Ukraine. Z-blogger Maxim Kalashnikov sharply criticized the methods of the Russian armed forces and stated the failure of the so-called SVO. Kalashnikov summed up the results of the three-year war in his blog. Kalashnikov showed footage of the Ukrainian city of Volchansk, which the Russian army virtually destroyed while trying to capture it in 2024. The Russian armed forces suffered huge losses in the battles for this settlement without any sense. This lunar landscape, where Stalingrad is resting, is Volchansk, where we somehow ended up in May 2024. That's how, guys, they don't liberate. That's how they destroy and punish. Why the hell did you go to the Kharkiv region to take Volchansk? After all, 2 months later, the enemy attacked Kursk. Several thousands of our soldiers fell around Volchansk. At the very least, people fell into traps. As a result of this Kharkiv raid in 2024, you did not create a security zone for the Belgorod region. HIMARS still gets you. And what was all this for? Kalashnikov said. He stated that Russia, at the current stage of its development, is not capable of waging a modern war. The SVO, which was launched by the Kremlin in February 2022, has completely failed. The goals have not been achieved. I can say absolutely clearly, a raw materials, corrupt, kleptocratic, bureaucratized system cannot wage modern wars and win, no matter what the propaganda says. It can only force a truce. It is impossible to fight in the 21st century as if you were in 1914. All this results in gigantic losses, gigantic destruction. We have a belt of destruction, which will require huge expenses for its restoration. The initial goals of the SVO have not been achieved. In Kiev, there are guys who are not denazified at all. Ukraine is armed to the teeth and is already in NATO, not legally, but in fact. And in Ukraine will be foreign troops. Here you are, your fruits of this meat grinder. They ground themselves up. Kalashnikov stated.